So, Mark, yeah, what were your first impressions then? FP1. I saw you a lot of wind. You were talking about the wind in the
Yeah,
live stream. Got up to
yeah,
21 kph at one point.
yeah. So and it was the tailwind in sector one in this session. So I expect it did pretty much what you'd expect, making the cars a little bit lively in sector one, but then understeer at the turn 11 onto the long straight, and for probably majority of the rest of the lap. Maybe turn 19 a little bit nervous on entry, and again you could see from the onboards that it is bumpy on the entry there, and there's quite a lot of people then struggling running wide over the curb on the exit. Quite a few people would have lost those laps if it was qualifying. So it looked pretty much as normal, although I heard on the commentary that they reckon that the track has been resurfaced turn 3 to turn 7, so maybe that part in sector 1 is a little bit smoother. But I thought the main thing was that I thought Max looked very comfortable very quickly. I mean, he did his lap times very early, both on the hard and the soft. And I expect there was a lot of track evolution at the end of that session when everyone was on softs or a few on mediums. So the fact that Lando and Oscar set quicker times, it looks good on the timing screen, but I mean, Oscar's particularly was very late. So I suspect that they are actually a bit worried, and I don't think it's as good as it looks for McLaren so far.
I thought it was quite interesting, though, that Max bailed out of his second lap on the softs at the end, saying that the car just felt too aggressive. It was bottoming
Yeah,
out too much,
yeah,
whereas
yeah,
Oscar did actually get a second lap out of those softs
yeah,
and went slightly quicker than Max.
yeah.
Would that suggest that the McLaren, again, just have a great car, and in terms of ride height, they seem to be right on it already?
Uh, Potentially that they've got their ride heights more nailed in than Red Bull, but Red Bull are probably pushing it deliberately to see what they can get away with, because you learn, if the driver can cope with it, you can learn more quickly by pushing the limits. The risk with that is that you upset the driver and you don't recover that. But with a driver with Max's level of talent and confidence, you would be able to push it harder, and he would be able to manage that and give you good feedback. So I think that's probably what they're doing there, because it's so critical. But
And perhaps to bear up what you're saying there, Mark, if we just look at what they did on the fuel runs right in the
yeah,
middle there, all the quick runners managed to get out on fuel for a few
yeah,
laps. Normally, it appears they do more or less the same times. In other words, they run the same amount of fuel. But get your input on this. Max was doing 39.4, 39.2, 39.8, whereas the McLarens were doing 36.8, 36.9, 37. Quite unusual to see a big difference between them when they're doing those longer runs. Or do you
yeah.
think that Red Bull are just mega slow?
No, I think they're running more fuel.
Yeah.
So it was always the sprint P1 session was always, there was always more variation between what teams decided to do. And a lot of people will go for like a 60, 70 kilo fuel load for that run, rather than going up for the full 105, 110 kilos. So I suspect that the McLarens were probably running something more like 60, 70 kilos. Because obviously for the driver, it's quite difficult to adjust across big weight changes. So it depends what your focus is. But
Well, and just sorry to interrupt, but
no,
McLaren were also, to bear out your point, McLaren were running longer on light fuel at the beginning as well, so they had
yeah,
less time to
yeah,
run heavy fuel and put the fuel in the car, I guess.
yeah, yeah. I think so. So that might have been a factor, but I think it depends what their focus is on. I would have thought, given that this is a hard tyre than last year, for Red Bull, I feel that they're quite confident, and they went to heavy fuel just to see what that tyre would do at that fuel level. Is my feeling.
Also, right at the end, just to get your take on Mercedes
Yeah,
running mediums,
yeah.
Ferrari running mediums. What's your take on that?
That's very interesting. I need a little bit of time to think about why they've done that. I suspect that they wanted to try to judge the performance difference between the medium and the hard, potentially, although doing that low fuel qualifying type run on the medium and against the hard on a rapidly evolving track is very difficult. It's interesting because you got 4 mediums for a sprint weekend, and you have to run a new medium in sprint quali 1 and sprint quali 2. So they will come out of sprint with 3 used and 1 new medium. Likely they'll use one of the used mediums for the sprint race, so they'll only have 1 medium left for the event on Sunday, whereas it's likely that the other teams will have 2. So yeah, I'm a bit puzzled by that, I have to say. I need to give it some more thought, but I'm not quite sure why they've done that.
Well, is it not just to get used to the feel of the car on the mediums for the qualifying for the sprint?
Yes, but it's got to be more to than that. I think they're thinking, given it's Mercedes, was it Mercedes, Ferrari, and
Racing Bulls? Yeah.
Racing Bulls probably more likely because they're probably just desperate to get as far up the grid as possible. But then, it's the sprint, and the sprint is not as important as the race. So they obviously feel that having 1 new medium only for the race is all they're going to need. They might be viewing it as either being heavy. Well, it's almost certainly going to be a 1-stop medium hard. They're going to have another, So, and if they need another tire towards the end, they'll just bung a soft on, I guess, for a few laps. So yeah, I'm slightly puzzled by that choice. Yes, it is benefiting sprint qualifying, but driver of George Russell's capability, I don't think he needs to feel that a medium is he's going to adapt to the soft very, very quickly anyway. For if he gets to SQ3. It's interesting. I think for me, that personally was actually the most interesting point that those teams did that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, performance-wise, I think Max is looking pretty strong.
Underlined by Yuki Tsunoda actually going quite well too.
He did, yeah. Although there's still a bit of a gap to Max, isn't there? But yeah, sorry.
Early on though, when the track was green and he was very quick out of the box, which is a good sign in terms of handling, feel, grip, balance.
Yeah, I think that part of it is distorted by the fact that a lot of the new novice drivers, shall we call them, rookie drivers, I think they're struggling a little bit. I mean, look at Antonelli is struggling a bit. Although I suppose Ollie Ocon had a problem, didn't he? So he didn't.
Yeah, I was going to ask you your take on that. Your old team, what happened there with the brakes? Do you reckon?
Difficult to say. I mean, he said the brakes, and then he said it stayed at 100%. So he must be talking about the throttle. It sounds like the throttle jammed open, which is pretty weird. Unless he had a brake-by-wire failure and then it just went to. No, then he wouldn't know that the throttle. Yeah, that's a pretty weird one. It's also interesting that Leclerc, he had a gearbox problem, so that's potentially two Ferrari drivetrain issues in P1.
Good point.
Which is a bit worrying, I would say.
A bit worrying for Leclerc as well. A very messy session for him. Didn't really build time at all. Whereas Lewis was quickest in the early runs. And his hard tire.
His car looked really nice. I have to say, there was some onboards of him on the heavy fuel, and it looked good. He did manage to outbrake himself into, was it 11 once?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I thought his car looked pretty good. Whereas when they showed the McLaren, or particularly Lando, earlier in the session, I thought his car looked a bit edgy. It didn't look smooth. It looked like he was kind of having to fight it a little bit around the lap, and it looked like that issue of quite a lot of low-speed understeer, and then into 19 a little bit edgy, and then unsteering wide. So it looked like they had a bit more of an issue in that respect.
Looks like quite a good weekend for Sauber. Hulkenberg pretty quick right at the end there.
Nico was very impressive, wasn't he? Yeah. And again, Bortoletto maybe struggling a little bit to get up to the pace, because we know he's quick. So he's got a bit of learning to do. But yeah, that car's looking stronger on this sort of circuit. Yeah.
And then finally, Mark, Aston Martin seem to be in the habit now of always looking pretty good on a Friday and just
Yeah.
fading away. Again, Fernando looked very good for a while. He looked very good on the soft tire,
Yeah.
didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And again, his time was set relatively early as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he waited right to the end to set that time. Yeah. So that was impressive. But as you say, we've seen it a few times that where on Friday they've looked really strong and then they just don't seem to have got it together when it matters, which is difficult to explain unless they run higher engine modes earlier in the weekend than anyone else. But when you've only got one session, normally the teams will have all run close to their quali settings for at least one lap at the end there, because their engine people will probably want to have seen that that's performing correctly before going into qualifying, because all this stuff, even the Ferrari guys, the engine guys are making, they're mapping out the way the engine, the recovery and the deployment of the energy, but they do need to kind of perfect it to make sure that they don't use it up too early or even don't use it enough. So they do like to get a full lap of deployment before going into quali. So maybe Mercedes, Aston ran full beans and other people haven't quite, maybe. But don't know. I mean, they've got Mercedes, so you wouldn't think that the Mercedes guys would be too keen to do something that other people are doing. But probably it's up to the team how they use it. They'll be given a certain number of laps of usage and said, well, use it how you want, but that's the number you've got. So if you use one here, you can't use it later on. That's how it's done.
Mark, brilliant to have your input as ever. Thank you so much for this. We'll see what happens in qualifying now for the sprint race.
Absolutely. Cheers then, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye.